gentleman for yielding. Take the chairman. Ms. Hempowitz, in your closing statement, closing part of your opening statement, you said, some have argued inaccurately that the recent Ukraine whistleblower improperly colluded with the House Intelligence Committee. Some have argued inaccurately. How do you know that the argument's not accurate?
Well, I base that simply on what's been said by the acting director of national intelligence and the intelligence community inspector general, as well as the whistleblower's attorneys who say that this individual is followed.
But I mean, you have no knowledge. You didn't talk to Chairman Schiff. Have you talked to Chairman Schiff about it?
No, sir.
Did you talk to his staff about the interaction they had with the whistleblower?
No, sir.
Did you talk to the ICIG about the interaction he had with the whistleblower?
No, sir, but I will say the committee staff did also say that they have talked publicly about what
But you made a blanket statement. You said some have argued inaccurate. We have no idea what took place between the whistleblower and Chairman Schiff's staff, and yet you come in front of the Oversight Committee on a hearing on whistleblowers, and you say some have argued inaccurately that the recent Ukraine whistleblower improperly colluded with the House Intelligence Committee. We have no idea.
Well, sir, I'm not quite sure what improper collusion would look like in that aspect, because the intelligence community whistleblower would be able to go to the committee and make their disclosure under the law. So I'm not quite sure what they could have done that would have been improper.
Well, we know the chairman thought that when he was first asked about it, he thought it was better off to say something that wasn't accurate, namely that his staff had no contact with the whistleblower, only to have to correct that a few days later and say, whoops, we actually did. So for some reason, he was willing to hide it, and yet you come here and say there was nothing done improperly, and you've not talked to any of the people who participated. And frankly, none of us have. No one in the country has. And I've got a chance to look at a little bit of the ICIG's testimony. It's interesting that Chairman Schiff has failed to release the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community's testimony. He did have a chance to go through and look at all this, but Chairman Schiff interviewed 18 people. He's released 17 transcripts of those 18 people that he interviewed in this impeachment inquiry, but not the Inspector General. You go on to say this, before making their disclosure, and that the, quote, whistleblower reported bias against the president undermined the disclosure. So bias doesn't matter?
According to Congress, no. You guys updated the law in 2012 to say that motive couldn't be considered a factor that would undermine whistleblower protection.
Bias
That's because the facts matter more.
Well, as far as whistleblower protection goes, I get that. But motive always matters. When you're evaluating the claim of anybody, you always have to look at bias and motive. And yet, again, you come in front of the Oversight Committee today on a hearing about whistleblowers, and you say bias doesn't matter, particularly bias against the President of the United States in an impeachment proceeding doesn't matter?
It certainly doesn't matter more than the facts. And I believe that most of the facts alleged in the underlying complaint have been corroborated.
Actually, there are all kinds of things that the whistleblower got wrong in the complaint because, again, as Mr. Heiss pointed out, the whistleblower had no firsthand knowledge. Do you know do you know, Ms. Hempowitz, you seem to be an expert on all this, do you know if we'd ever, in the impeachment inquiry in the House, do you know if we talked to any of the people who did have firsthand knowledge?
I think you have not, and I think mostly because they have refused to come before the committee.
No, I'm talking about the people the whistleblower alleges in his complaint. Bullet point number 1, the whistleblower's complaint, he says this, over the past 4 months, more than half a dozen U.S. officials have informed me about the complaint. Do you know who those more than half a dozen U.S. officials are?
No, sir.
I don't either. No one knows because guess what? We didn't get to talk to the whistleblower. The whistleblower who is biased, and the whistleblower who met with Adam Schiff's staff, and then Adam Schiff said, no, he didn't, only later to have to correct that and say, well, yes, he did. And remember what else Mr. Schiff said about the whistleblower. Early on in this process, back in September, guess what Adam Schiff said? We look forward to hearing from the whistleblower. Remember that?
I believe that's when the whistleblower wanted to testify publicly.
That's when we all wanted to hear from the whistleblower, including Adam Schiff, but suddenly that changed when Adam Schiff made the other statement that they hadn't talked to, that his staff had not met with him when in fact they had. I just find it amazing that you can say some have argued inaccurately that the recent whistleblower improperly colluded with the House Intelligence Committee, and you have no knowledge whether it was accurate or not, whether they colluded or not. Sure looks like they did, particularly in light of the fact that the chairman tried to hide the fact that they met in the first place.
Again, I'm just not quite sure what could be improper about those conversations. And so it's difficult for me to imagine what could have gone on, but I can't speak to why Chairman Schiff said what he said. Like I said earlier, I have not spoken with him.
I thank the chairman. I yield back.